Here we are, episode number 27, I think it is. Correct me if I'm wrong, but with the beautiful, incredible Mo. So thank you so much for joining us. And as I said to Mo just before this call, literally this has been the conversation. It's Friday here in New Zealand, Thursday late night in Canada. It's the conversation I've been most looking forward to because, for so many reasons, but I really can't wait. So thank you, Mo, for joining us.
You're very welcome. And I'm looking forward to the conversation too, because this is totally unrehearsed and unplanned, and we're just going to see what emerges.
And that's what evolution's all about. It's just seeing where it goes. And Mo, so you've had a massive sort of background in helping organizations kind of get the best out from system change, helping organizations flourish. You've got your own sort of framework, which we'll kind of ask a question shortly, but maybe just a quick synopsis of your last incredible 67 years. And as I said before the call, I feel like you're just warming up and starting to do some of your most incredible work now. So,
well, that is wonderful. Thank you. So I've, going back, it's so interesting to go back that many decades, but I won't go into it all. But I grew up in Scotland and I came to North America when I was 19. And that was in the early 70s, and joined Xerox. So it's kind of interesting to start off my career at a time with Xerox and IBM of those days was like LinkedIn and Google of today. So, and it was also a time when there were no women leaders. So I can still remember when I got my first management job, and I was the first female manager with pink steel-toed shoes in manufacturing at Xerox. So those were the days where you didn't think about, well, what career did I want to have? You thought about, where can I break in? And so that was interesting. And then in my mid-40s, I decided to leave the corporate world and start up my own consulting practice. We were doing a large change initiative, and the metaphor was the burning platform. And then I found that while I was a quality specialist, my background was manufacturing, etc., quality and problem solving didn't work on human change. And so back in the late 90s, I left looking for a way to bring humanity and how to have a more human side of change. And that's what got me into my current practice. And it's based on, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, a strength-based philosophy methodology called appreciative inquiry. So that's kind of a quick, so that's the first 2/3 of my life. I'm now going into the third act, as Jane Fonda talks about it, and looking forward to see what might unfold with that.
And I look forward to this conversation and at Wonder and Wonder, and thank you so much for your support and sort of guidance, and energetically and through your wisdom as well on what we're trying to create in regards to bringing the willing and the wise, because there is literally so much wisdom out there. And I look to my dad as an example, my mum as an example, is that literally getting the age bracket of 65 and getting pushed into retirement. Like Dad had redundancy after 43 years in aviation, but yet has so much more wisdom to give back. So I really can't wait to this. And this is what you're doing as well, is literally, yeah. But I see there's wisdom on the other end. Like, I'm learning so much from 19, 20-year-old people on how they solve problems. So you can't define by age or bracket or background. So
no, I'm very fortunate during this COVID time that there are 3 young people who are in their mid to late 20s that I have a weekly call with. And we talk about being mentors to each other, mentor and intern. So I'm with you. I think that it is the wholeness of all of us. And whereas the past, we broke things in, and everybody, you're in your 20s, you're in your 30s, and so on. So I'm with you. I'm very excited. I think that's the most hopeful thing that I feel is coming out of this last, this shift now. What COVID is doing is reminding us that we need to connect together, and all ages, because, wisdom comes in many shapes and sizes, as do ideas. So
100%. And collective wisdom coming together on a collaborative approach for everyone to, we use the word flourish in kind of this conversation, but I'm kind of going to use your framework and kind of turn it back on your front with is your air philosophy is, and we're going to bring some fresh air to this conversation. And in the last 8 weeks, what have you appreciated the most being the A?
Well, I think So when we talk about the AIR framework, it really starts with let's pause, and that's like what we're doing right now. Let's just kind of get ourselves collected and kind of make that, getting ourselves grounded. And then we look at appreciating the past. So as I look at what have I appreciated, I think like when I talk to many people, it's the relationships. It's the fact that we've been able to build an intimacy through, forums like this. So I really appreciate technology. When I emigrated at 19 in 1972, I had only seen a manual typewriter. Yeah. So think about how far we have come in 2 generations. And so I think that's one of the things is that we're embracing it. So we really are doing high tech and high touch. And so I really see a difference, people in the business world going more onto video, being more prepared. And also I love it when clients will say that they start all their calls talking about their life, and their kids will kind of, what's that word, photobomb them, their dogs. So I think that's the thing. I grew up in the world where you couldn't be yourself at work. It was all that facade in this, 70s, 80s, 90s. And what I love about this is that we're seeing wholeness, we're getting to see each other in our lives and comfortable with it. So that for me is, I think, a very exciting part. And it's global. And it's global. We can talk to people all over the world, like you and I.
It is, exactly. And there's no barriers to learn, grow, and evolve. Like we used to have to pay thousands of dollars to jump on a plane to do a certification and be surrounded by people. But as we'll talk later down the course, obviously we're in travel and events, and we've been able to have this blessed position of the last 8 weeks and gratitude to go, you know what, well, events and experiences are going to have those high touch points that you can't have in a Zoom room, but a lot of the content and the curated learning can actually happen before the event and experience. So,
And I'm going to push you a little bit, because I think the intimacy of breakout rooms, when 2 people meet and they have the chance to have, because I think that's the other thing that I'm really appreciating is the breakout rooms almost feel like a safe space.
Definitely, yeah.
So, that's the beauty of the design and the exchange design, where we're, divergent, convergent. But I have some clients that I have never met and worked with for 1.5 years. Wow. And we've done everything through Zoom. So I think it's that both end.
100%. And then so onto the I. So what are you kind of imagining now moving into what we've learned over this last 8 weeks?
Wow.
What's the imagination that you've let gone wild about how we can actually bring together and flourish? Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think this is a really important part. When you listen to Danny Friedland, he talks about the liminal space, that space between, the transformation of the caterpillar into the butterfly. So I feel like we're moving into that. So it's not so much, it's time for us to kind of lift our heads up and start to think about and dream a little bit about what we want the future to be. And I've been in some calls recently. One the other day, it was 100 coaches and facilitators, and it was global. And it was interesting. I was in a room with someone from Japan, someone from France, someone from the States. And we were all talking about how over the last few weeks, what's becoming much more meaningful is the human dynamic, the relationship. And there's that question. And so I think a lot of what I'm imagining is that we take the best of this time, which has been that human connection, and collectively have conversations around how do we want to bring some of these things that we're experiencing and valuing into our everyday life, our family life. How do we continue having some of the rituals that we're seeing now? How do we bring it into our society? So I imagine that we're going to have a lot of collective inquiry so that we can dream together in our communities to imagine what this next, I think this is, and Meg Wheatley, who was very much in complexity thinking, talked the other day, this is the end of our civilization and it's the beginning of the new civilization. And I felt that way for a long time. So that's why that imagine, I can't yet imagine what it looks like, but I can imagine the way that I hopefully will come together to co-design and co-dream.
Isn't it just, aren't we so fortunate and blessed that it happened in our generation?
Oh, listen, I'm telling you, I go back to when I emigrated, I'd only seen a manual typewriter. I earned $2 an hour minimum wage at Bell Canada, the telephone company, and paid them $1 a minute to call Scotland back home. So I think about, we are so blessed. And because we can have these intergenerational things, I think all ages can benefit from this. And we're going to struggle and suffer. So I think we need to always be not too quick to what's the positive and what's the good, but what's got you through the struggle? How have you dealt with your suffering? How have you helped be with others? So that's what I kind of imagine a little bit as ahead of us.
Yeah, 100%. And this probably goes really nicely into the sort of reflection part, but just digress a little bit for a few minutes, is that I read a post by a good friend of mine and John Berghoff's is Jason Gaynard, and he's like, a lot of suffering is happening right now, and a lot of pain, but if we just want to pause and appreciate back to if you were born in the year 1900,
yes,
and as an American, and he flowed the timeline of literally, it was not until the age of 75, if you're born in 1900, that your wars stopped, or your depressions, or your Spanish flu. And so just to put that perspective in place,
sure.
I just thought it was fascinating. But reflection back into, it's just fascinating, the timeline of typewriter to now we're speaking in a Zoom room and we have collaboration from the smartest minds a button away. How has system changed to the positive and also to the negative over that timeline for you? What's been lost and what has been gained?
Well, that's a big question. And, and because I can kind of go from like the 70s to today. So I think of like in the 70s, if I look at it from a business standpoint, it was a bit like Mad Men. There was this like a free West, crazy time. Then we got into that era of quality. And I feel like the late 80s going into the 90s, when, stakeholder was the number one, quality and efficiency, I think we lost, as we were bringing in the technology, we lost some of the humanity. And I think we were so focused on the mechanistic world in those days. And so I think what we've gained is the realization that as automation comes in, and we've flipped into more automation than we could ever have dreamt. I mean, can you imagine today, people are going to be, they may not like it, but they're going to be more comfortable with telehealth instead of going to the doctors, doing Zoom calls, business meetings. So we've kind of been tipped into it right now. And so every age has, things you gain, things you lose. But I think what we're gaining is we're getting back into the humanity piece.
I definitely think so. The humanity piece, it's like the ebbs and flows, or the peaks and troughs. And it's like, as you said, we've fast tracked this automation and technology and everything. And literally it's even the last 8 weeks has probably been like Sarah, my great partner, is literally went back into the corporate world and went to head of change. And her day 2 of induction was, how do you take 35,000 people and work remotely and still have a culture and technology and everything? So they had a plan to do that over time, and they thought it would take 2 years. They've done it in 2 months. So this rapid speed. But then, as you said, appreciative inquiry, design thinking, John Berghoff's work is literally blown up. It was kind of like 5 years of ticking away, and then everyone's like, oh my goodness, we need human conversations, and now it can be done through Zoom. It's fascinating.
It truly is. It's a bit like the bamboo tree.
Yep.
You plant it, nothing happens much for 4 years, and then it just zooms. So I think of Y2K, because I was around in that era, the turn of the century. Everybody was so worried about what Y2K would do. And I think of that as a way to level the playing field and kind of bring everyone up to a technology level, because we all had to upgrade all of our systems, and things went fine. And I think of this as a software upgrade for our emotions and for our minds as humanity, because suddenly we've had to, we've not been imagining, we've had to kind of shift our mindset to thinking of meetings in a different way and embracing in technology. And I don't think it would have happened in 2 years. I think it could have just dragged on. So we've tipped into this. And so it's been I feel very blessed to be in the world at this time, and still a little afraid because gosh only knows what's going to happen. But yeah, it is an interesting time.
You say this is, and a lot of us use the word catalyst for change, or moving from caterpillar to butterfly, and those terms. And I love that term, is that, yeah, we can literally transform and take flight. We're gone from walking along and trying to get through, there's a dense bush on the ground, to catalyzing into let's take flight. You have a pretty big choice to either adopt where we're at or not. And I feel like there's going to be two speeds. Is that going to separate even more moving forward? I don't know.
I don't know. It's an interesting thought. If we think of it in the mechanistic either or, I go forward or I don't, which is what we've had for the last 300 years, I think we're going to be in real trouble. I think if we look at it more from a holistic, which is what appreciative inquiry and other strength-based approaches, and we look at it more like nature, it's a both and. So we're going to have people moving in and out. It's not an on-off switch. And at times, I mean, one of my closest friends, who's always been a very definitive thinker, said yesterday, the thing I came out of COVID is I realized that we're all changing our minds and our emotions are flowing back and forward. And I'm much more accepting of people who are changing their mind, and maybe yes, maybe no. So I think that it is an evolution, and some of us will suffer much more than others. The International Futures Forum, Maureen O'Hara, talks about, and she wrote this 2009, we must be the palliative caregivers to the dying culture, the midwives to the new. Our children are the only natives, so we got to get ahead and change how we educate them. Some of us will be immigrants, and most of us will be refugees. So you think most people are tipped into this like a refugee in that sense. And so I think part of it is it's going to take time, it's going to take compassion, it's going to take a whole lot of stuff, and we'll move back and forward, in and out. So I think of it like a bell curve. There will be some people who will move faster, and there were some people that will be perhaps a little slower. And I think our job is to be compassionate. A friend of mine a long time ago put a half circle on the bell curve and wheels and said it's a Volkswagen Beetle. And this is the brakes and this is the accelerator. And if we keep our foot on the brake, we won't go anywhere. But brakes are important. So I think we've got to kind of learn how to engage and be with people where they're at while still helping them in that evolution. I don't know if that's making sense or not.
I definitely I think this time's given us permission to be able to, as you said, dip in and dip out. Just the environment's been able to give us that permission where maybe we're searching for it as a civilization to go dip in and dip out. And I literally had this conversation with as we're building this Evolved Schools program, where it's like we've got all this wisdom. How do we share that and enable young people? And they were like, well, you can't prescribe.
No.
Because we're a generation that is all around co-creation. So they don't even need to learn about appreciative inquiry. They're already kind of adapting it. Like they're like, we need to input, we need to be a part of the solution. We need to collectively, I'm like, it's just magical to hear those things versus people asking us, why do we need appreciative inquiry in our organization? So.
Well, and I think, and I'm going to push back a little, having worked with a lot of young people, particularly in the environmental movement and stuff, is they need to see the possibility piece too. So there's often, it's not, it's innate in us to kind of be drawn towards that, I think. And it's not just appreciative inquiry, but being conscious about which lens do we want to look at it. And so I think it's like, there's the negative bias. So we have a tendency in the brain to want to be studying and looking at the negative. So I think it's that kind of helping them see different language to use and how to bring ourselves together. So I think it's a very exciting time. And as I say, some people are more ready to move And there's going to be a lot of people who are fearful and suffering, whether they're all different ages. So how do we kind of make sure we don't leave people behind?
What are some good tools that you've seen or you're sharing to help people evolve through this time, or even pre-COVID, around the methodologies that you share and help organizations? But I think the great thing, what I learned with Exchange, it actually gave me, like, always lean into curiosity and think, well, how can this framework actually help me in other aspects of my life, versus just going in, as you said, with a lens of, okay, how is this going to help my business? And I literally walked away from Exchange Week, where we met through John Berghoff, was this has helped my life 90%, and it's helped my business 10%. And that will pivot and change over time. But yeah, what are some tools or examples that we can kind of lean in? Because a lot of people in New Zealand and Australia are so negatively biased and so into, we need to solve a problem. It's so hard to actually even lean into appreciative inquiry, because they find it so hard to find a high point. And that's what we shared on our last call with design thinking, is like, sometimes you just people want to talk about problems. We start there. So
yeah. Well, appreciative inquiry is about solving problems. So people do start with the problem. The opportunity is to get people to pause for a moment and reflect on their past, about what's been their successes that has given them the insight. And I think the difference is that gives you that chance to have that energy that then takes you in. And in design thinking, and I'm a little familiar with it. And a few years ago, a colleague and I had this conversation, and her area was design thinking. And she was talking about, when you go straight into that problem piece, you're missing. So where I think an approach like appreciative inquiry or any of the strength-based approaches is, it gives you a chance to pause, to then think about, okay, what is the situation I'm in? How might I reframe it and then grow from there? So I think, you're familiar, and people who are listening will not be, but there's colleagues, Jackie Stavros and Sherry Torres, has written Conversations Worth Having. And there's two practices. So if you want to kind of understand this, and it's the two practices, this is a good book to look at. And the first practice is positively reframing. So it's a choice. How can I look at the situation? And then the second is the generative question. So in the positive reframing, if I go in and and it happened to me in school. So someone asked me, we've got too much bullying going on. So let's name it. You're saying it's bullying's the issue. What if we flipped it, and they said, well, then we'd have anti-bullying. Okay, so now we've got anti-bullying. If we study bullying and the anti-bullying, we know a lot about bullying. But what do you really want more of? Like, at the end of this, what do you want more of? And what they said was, we want a safe and inclusive school. So a safe and inclusive school doesn't exist if there's bullying going on. So appreciative inquiry is that opportunity to stop and inquire into, what is it that you want to, what do you really want? And often we've started off with the problem solving. And I can still remember in the early 80s when problem solving was just new stuff. Yeah. So, and it was a 6-step model and so on. So I think that for me is the biggest, is to really kind of sit down with someone and say, what do you really want more of? When you put all this time and effort in, what will success look like? And then you start to help them look at reframing the topic. But the topic, they come to you because there is a problem. Or there's an opportunity. So I think it's not about avoiding the problem. It's about looking at the human system and finding where's the energy to get through it. Yeah. And I always figure, if you can figure out what's working, you get the energy to fix what's not. And that's why my business is called ROE, Return on Energy, because if people are energized about a topic, the chances are they'll be more engaged.
So many mic drop moments in this. And I literally had this conversation this morning with my parents around, as Dad said, he's just like, it's been really interesting over this time of 8 weeks, being able to tune into these types of conversations that I've been having and just what's coming through on social media. And he's like, all these shortened definitions like AI, artificial intelligence, or appreciative inquiry, CX, DX, all these things. He's like, We did that 30 years ago in aviation. It was just called something else. And now they're kind of a little bit bamboozled. They're like, well, what is appreciative inquiry? And then you kind of break it down and they're like, we didn't. So what was appreciative inquiry before it was an appreciative inquiry in the 70s before?
Well, I would say even David would say why he didn't copyright the term initially was because it's existed all along, because living systems will be drawn towards the light. So if you think about a plant or a sunflower, it follows the light across the sky. If you look at children, they're drawn towards that energy. And so I think you've always had people who have had an energy that's attracted people. And when you break it down, you realize it's because they're optimistic. They're also realistic. Like, it's not that they don't deal with problems, but they find a way to attract people towards what they want. So when I used to work with students who were doing their master's in environmental studies and bring in this as a method to use for engagement of stakeholders, and they would be at the end of their, undergraduate and then master's program. And when I would explain that you start by looking for what's working, where's the commonality? I like to think of it, find where people are like-hearted, not like-minded.
Yep.
Because if we can find where we're like-hearted, we'll work together and we can use the diversity of our thinking to create ideas. And so when we would get into this conversation, one young girl was in tears. She said, why didn't someone tell me that I can follow my passion with this energy rather than feeling I have to fight everybody out there? And so I think it has always been there, but we've spent the last 300 years in a very mechanistic, it was the scientific revolution. If I don't see it, I won't believe it. And now we're in an area with quantum physics. If I don't believe it, I won't see it. So we've gone from that, it's either or. And so it felt like it was the right thing to do, was to look at the problem. And now we know from the neurosciences that we are emotional beings who rationalize. And so I think that's a lot of the evolution that we're in. So it made sense when we understood it. And now we've got more knowledge and information to tell us to go back to more of a natural science approach. And that's why you're seeing people talking about ecosystems, and they're looking at nature rather than looking at how do you build a car. Because I still believe you need the mechanistic part for aspects of our life. So that will not go away. However, more and more stuff is complex. And the metaphor I've always been taught about complexity is it's like raising a child. You've got to be principle based. And that's where dialogic ideas like appreciative inquiry come in. But often I can be working with a client and never use that term.
Yeah.
It's modeling it.
And now, do you think now is the time finally that, because some people listening to this call, especially in some networks down in Australia and New Zealand, they'll hear the term return on energy, and they're like, hang on, this is a little bit out there of left. And I'm like, now is the time. If you don't lean into energy is surrounded, it's everywhere around us, and it's time to kind of stand up. And it's like, I had a conversation around heart math the other day. Obviously, I'm just learning about it, but energy is just like, the mind projects, I think, 3 inches. We know for a fact that there's vibrational energies, and electricity fires up the brain. And if you stand under a pole, electrical pole, and you have a neon stick, it will light up. It's energetically charged. And I didn't realize until I had this conversation with heart math was that the mind projects out sort of 3 centimeters. The heart can go out to 9 feet. So if I'm feeling pissed off or frustrated, that can be felt when I'm in a conversation. We can talk about the gut feeling, but it's actually the heart feeling. So now is the time to really dive into this energy thing. If there's bad energy, it's hard to make progress. So.
And I think it's that energy it's not that it's good or bad, it's just recognize that you can manage some of that energy. Or if you're even feeling that you bring a dark energy in, is own it and let people know there's something going on in my life right now. Because I think that's the part where we don't express it. So, we've always had expression, heartfelt, heartbroken, or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's a energy. We are all energy fields. And so my sense is that when we can tap into what gives life, and that's what David Cooperrider talks about, this whole methodology, is we're looking for what's giving life to a system. And if we can tap into that, and anybody who's in New Zealand or Australia, I mean, Michelle McQuaid, who's out of Australia, I mean, she's global, but she has phenomenal resources, michellemcquaid.com, to just reach out to and learn more about this whole topic, because she brings in positive psychology, appreciative inquiry. So there's lots of things out there. Not be worried about the term, lean into what you feel you're attracted to.
100%. And I love that. It's like there's so many great methodologies out there. There's, as Sarah says, the wonder mindset is like a combination of 70 different things. And it's like, use when you feel energetically towards, I need to use that framework. And that's what we kind of use. So thanks for that. And I'll definitely put the links into, you had an amazing podcast that I listened to with you and Michelle before. So I'll put that in the links. And I love the positive reframe, and I'll put the links into the books too.
Yeah, that would be great.
Is the positive reframe that has literally transformed my last 2 years. For the people that are listening, they've kind of seen my journey over the last 2 years of spiraling out of control and finding it really hard to find that light and that energy. And there's a lot of dark clouds. And I thought the world was just one big dark cloud. To be able to do the positive reframes. And I think just give an example in the last 24 hours was financial literacy is not my strong point. And
many of us, it's not. Yeah.
Many of us. And we've had some real big issues with our accountants not being reactive. They're being very reactive versus proactive. And it's just this monumental thing that's now got to. And I was like, it's the accountant's fault. It's this. And you've actually picked me up on this before when I've been putting it out there, and I'm like, literally did the air. It's like, pause. What is the lesson to be learned here, and how can I lean into this with a positive experience? And literally in the last 24 hours, things have moved, and I've started to enjoy learning about my accounts, because I know there is a lesson. If I can embrace this, things move forward. So thank you so much for picking me up on that a couple of times through my social media posts. I respect you and admire you for reaching out, because it literally has changed the way I kind of progress forward.
Well, I think it's important because it's very easy to blame external. And what can I take into myself, and what am I responsible for? And so I'm thank you for commenting. I'm glad that you you were open, and that was the sense that I got, was that you would be open to offering a perspective, because that's all anyone can do, is offer you a perspective. It's your choice to move into it or not. So.
And what would be your lasting thoughts right now in regards to your dream state, and for people out there listening to kind of lean into asking better questions and constructing better conversations? What would be kind of your last thought for people listening?
Well, I think sometimes it's being authentic. It's like I was out for a walk yesterday, and I met this 97-year-old woman who was standing with some lily of the valley flowers in her hand at her gate by her garden. And I paused and smiled and just said hello. And suddenly we got into a conversation. And I think, be aware that there's people around you. She was living alone. We're all in isolation, quarantine. And, at the end of a conversation, she came back and she said, "Thank you. This has just made my day." And it made that way for me. So, what's the right question? What's that? Be in the pause, be in the right frame, be in the right heart set and mindset, and care about the people around you. I think that's, to me, and the question can be, what's up? It's not that it's a beautifully framed question, but you want to ask something other than, "Hi, how are you?" Because that's rote. It's like, so what's getting you through the day? But be genuinely interested and pay attention to all the people in your community. You just never know whose life you're going to make a difference. And
Thank you.
And it will be your truth.
Thank you so much, Mo. And I'm not too sure if you've come across Vivek Murthy, who wrote
Yes.
the book. Yeah, so I'm reading his book at the moment. So on the whole loneliness, isolation thing. I think I've mentioned it 3 times now, but I'm glad you've come across it. So
yeah. I often get into the elevator. So Vivek Murthy was the Surgeon General for Obama, and a young guy in his late 30s. And one of the things I love is that he talks about when you get in the elevator, start a conversation. And so it's as simple as that: is open your eyes, don't be so inwardly focused, bring yourself out. That's the best thing you can do.
Mo, you're a beam of light to everyone and the people that you connect with, and thank you so much for John Berghoff and Exchange. Obviously, we met there and continued the conversation post, and just as I say, the best work's to come, and can't wait to keep on following that journey and being part of that journey. So thank you so much.